development is to foster a sense of connection and reciprocity in order to share our appreciation and our responsibility as a human community, action to bring about health and well-being for all. This is how we understand the role of higher education to be in the context of sustainable development. And why do we say this? Because when we look at the state of higher education in Kenya, in Africa, in the world today, we see that there is a lot of emphasis on facts, a lot of emphasis on natural science, empiricism, and positivism. And much of the knowledge that we see transmitted or transferred in the universities is heavily compartmentalized. We see a lot of neglect of holistic thinking. We see neglect of emotional and spiritual teaching and learning. Very little research on spiritual and emotional well-being. And therefore, the knowledge that we are producing in higher education, the knowledge that we are transferring in higher education, the knowledge that we are translating is disconnected from the social, cultural, and spiritual needs of the world today. And for this reason, there's a huge gap between higher education outcomes and sustainable development needs. If we have time, we'll be able to play a video. If you look next to the title, The Role and State of Higher Education, we have embedded a small clip there. So if we had time, we'll be able to watch it, but for now, we'll skip it because we don't have much time. So what are the challenges? What are the challenges that we are facing as a human community? And why do we think that a love-centered approach to higher education would make a difference? We observe that global challenges and the responses that we need to make to those challenges are centered on relationships. Relationships within one person, relationship between one person and other persons, relationship between persons, and every other thing that you can think of, the entire environment, the entire creation, relationship between humans and animals, humans and plants, humans and non-living things. Our relationship with things is at the center of our global challenges. We look at the Global Development Framework, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we observe that it's perhaps comprehensive. It tries to focus on all areas, on humans, on animals, on seas and waters, on air. It focuses on almost everything. But in our view, it is not holistic because it is compartmentalized. In the very way it is presented graphically in boxes, and then there are white spaces in between, these spaces compartmentalize the problems as if they operate independent of the other. Yet, we know for sure that inequalities have something to do with hunger, have something to do with higher education, they have something to do with cities and health. All these goals are actually interrelated. So that even as we present them graphically, we should try not to put gaps between them, divide them, separate them, but we should find that which brings all of them together into one whole. And this is what we are calling a spiritual perspective. So that the spirit around all the sustainable development goals would be about bringing the goals together and looking at them as they relate to each other. So there'd be no there's no synchronization of higher education with the sustainable development goals. So you see that many universities are not focusing on the sustainable development goals. Some even have issues with them, and they are saying we can't operate on this framework. So again, we see issues around relationships. And it is for this reason that we think there is need to integrate love in teaching and learning, in research, and in service. Why love? because love embraces all issues that are important in relationships. If you're loving, you'll be honest. If you're loving, you'll respect others. If you're loving, you will play your role. You take your responsibilities seriously with due respect to every creation that there is in this world. I would now like to invite Dr. Masese.
Thank you so much. Let me give you an example of pastoral education where we have integrated spirituality in learning. This is a project which we are learning based on the gaps we have identified or we identified. In when you look, for instance, I was saying that this is a program which we started when we identified the gaps when we are offering health issues from a biomedical perspective. Taking into account that World Health Organization sees health as holistic, that is, they have to do with the body, mind, and the environment. Also, when you talk about One Health approach, which includes health as seen as in terms of people, environment, and animals, we know that there's a missing connections or something which connects all of these things. For example, you cannot differentiate between the mind, you cannot do away with the mind, body, and the environment in treatment. But when we look at trainings of biomedical doctors, most of them concentrate on the body and the mind and the environment separately in compartments. So in our program, we decided to include in spirituality as an interconnecting aspect. Spirituality means dealing with relationships which are dictated by the supreme being, something powerful. And therefore, we know that if you are dealing with the diseases, for example, these diseases have connection, mostly when from the African perspective, illness is when there's a dysfunction between the environment, the body, and the mind. Then how do we restore these relationships? For instance, somebody can be sick. Like, for example, we normally say that when somebody is sick, he goes to the hospital and he gets a disease. He goes to the hospital with illness and he gets a disease. This means that there are some things this person looks at on how to restore relationships so that this person can be well. To give you an example how we have managed this program is that in the hospitals, we have encouraged people to understand the perspective of patients. We have also observed that when people to come to the hospital, they are trying to also come up to issues to do with relations with their neighbors, their environment, and their mental health. So in this case, we are training doctors how to integrate all these things, understand your patients, understand his relation with the environment, understand the patient in relation to the other people. For example, a case in point that we had somebody who wanted to go for theater, and he has some slings tied in his body, on our body. She was supposed to go for, and this parade says he was going for theater, and she said that if you remove this thing, I will definitely die. And when the doctors were instant, they cannot take somebody in theater with these things tied on him. When they asked one of our colleagues who's working with us, he told them, you just leave him, because when you remove this thing, you lose this power. This person feels he has lost the power. So when they put her into sleep, they remove them. And when she wake up, they turn them back. So that shows that this person felt that those symbolic things are connecting her to the supreme being to protect her from any harm when she's going to theater. So in this case, we are trying that when we are doing all of this when we are including spirituality, we are able to have holistic healing people are able to restore their relationship between their health, between their body, their mind, and the environment, which is holistic health. Also, by including this, by training doctors on this pastoral care and including spirituality, we have seen it's patient-centered. It's more responding to the patient's needs. And what we have come up with is that the patients are more satisfied. Thank you.
And
so I was listening to Dr. Masese's presentation, and he was insisting on the perspective of patients in care and well-being of patients. I would say about the environment, you also need to take into account the perspective of the people you're interacting with. And this is why I'm insisting on dialogue. So talking to these teenagers, I realized they were used to being told to clean up, and they're resenting it because of the inequality and the hierarchies that this implies. Someone else is telling them to clean up. So you start by talking about these hierarchies and this inequality to kind of level the ground for the conversation. Otherwise, you can't move any further. You can't start talking about shared responsibilities about the environment if the person and the teenagers you have in front of you consider this is a constraining demand on the part of adults. So in the Kenyan society, it's very, very normal for children to follow adults' commands and to obey. And in the school setting, it's the same. They're used to obeying to the administration. And cleaning up, in this case, of course, the very practical exercise was going to be cleaning up the school grounds and looking at the different types of waste to try to instill the idea of limiting waste, reusing, recycling in the context of urban life. So we started by this exchange to say that we are aware of the inequalities and we are aware of the constraints so that we can start discussing more important issues, but also to appeal to the sense of justice of the young people. I think this is how I tackled the task that was assigned to me to introduce these issues around environmental concerns to young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Medard. Thank you very much, Dr. Masese. Fellow participants, that's our presentation. Basically, we are saying that the problem we have in the world today is not lack of things or lack of material well-being, but you have a challenge of relationships, which is a spiritual challenge. And therefore, we need to introduce spirituality in teaching and learning at the university. Thank you very much.